Kimba the White Lion is a bit of a special case when it comes to anime dubbing. This is because there's actually two different forms of the English dub made for the show itself. I've already mentioned this in my first review of the franchise, and that two-parter consisted mainly of the 1960s version. Today, though, I'm going over the more widespread example that is the 1993 version.
Kimba, the white lion, he's the bravest little guy in the land.
Also known as the Canadian dub, or Kimba the Lion Prince, the 1993 dub became possible thanks to Zaza's Sound Productions, who wanted the show to be shown on TV again. What resulted from there was a 44-episode series runtime, with new voice casts, new music, and a new episode script. Of course, this also made a good amount of cutting that left a few minutes off each episode. Now, I've read up online that people do not like this version, especially those who are more familiar with the 1960s version beforehand. So, what this review is going to be asking is this: is the Canadian dub better or worse than the original 1960s version? This is my own opinion, of course, and if you don't agree with me, then that's fine. Either way, I guess the best way to figure this out is to see what it did differently, and then compare the two. So when watching this version, the first thing, at least I think, is what's noticed differently is the music. Unlike the first dub, the 1993 version wasn't able to use any of the original soundtrack. What resulted instead was a more linear and limited musical score that, unlike the first version, doesn't play along with the actions of the characters. What that basically means is that while the first one has music playing along with actions, this dub accommodates this with stock sound effects instead. Now, some might think this isn't such a good idea, but I think that they did a fairly good job with how they utilize it and what soundtrack is actually used. One thing too, there isn't a moment where everything's just silent, and music is always playing throughout the episode. I think I know why this is, and that involves a second, probably more effective factor. The voice acting is probably the most notable change between both dubs, and probably what people mostly dislike about this version of it. And unfortunately, somewhat, I do have to agree with the critics on for this, at least with some examples of the show. It kind of holds a similar problem to Leo the Lion, but not as strongly, thank the stars. The audio quality is just fine with them, and the voices are much more varied too, but there are times where they sound just a little bit low-key. But unlike Leo the Lion, some voices are actually pretty good. Or at least decent. Kimba's voice to me is especially nice. It shows him as kinder childlike even, and he sounds a lot like Brave Little Toaster. Like I said though, some voices could use some more work. Polly Cracker, for instance, has this tendency to squawk a ton in between his lines, and there is a bit of an emphasis on growling that I think is used just a little too much.
Anyone who disobeys King Boo Boo the Great will have to pay. Let them disobey. I'll show them.
So I've mentioned these before, and I'll mention it again. Names are once again switched around, but not as much as you think. There's still Kimba the White Lion, Bucky the Antelope, Polly the Parrot, and Daniel Baboon. But now there's Leia instead of Kitty, Boo Boo's got his name back, alongside Pagula, who was originally referred to as Kelly Font. Now, I was gonna make an argument how all the other characters have a completely different name again, but after doing some research, it turns out they actually didn't. They actually have their original Japanese names back. For instance, one leopard character appears that was named Speedy, but in the 1993 version and original Japanese dub, he's called Bongo. Another character, a warthog, was called Gargoyle G Warthog in the 1960s version. Awesome name, by the way. But in the Japanese original dub and in this 1993 version, he's referred to as Beller. I'm gonna go over this one in particular in just a minute. So we've gone over the different music and different voice acting, but now we reach the meat of this review: story. Comparing the 1993 dub and the 1965 dub is a textbook example of how you can tell basically the same story, but through a different context. I mean, sure, Panja can go into a village and get some farm animals out, but why is he doing it? Kimba can face off against the hyena, sure, but why are the hyenas even a threat? It's details like these where any form of dubbing can really do whatever it wants, so long as the end goal is pretty much the same. I think the best way to explain this in entirety is do an episode comparison, and I think I worked out the best examples to showcase the best and worst of this dub: the insect invasion and the runaway. So let's go over the insect invasion first. Now the overall plot goes like this. Kimba, along with some carnivores, try to eat vegetation as a means to make the jungle a more peaceful place, while waiting for the farm to grow. However, the main antagonist of the episode, a swarm of locusts, or grasshoppers as they're called, invades the jungle and threatens to consume all the plant life. Kimba and the animals lock the locust swarm inside a cave after a grand plan, and all is good and well. That is the plot in a nutshell. Now let's compare the versions scene by scene. The first scene has different plants for the carnivores to eat. The 1993 version only had the plants being basic banana leaves, and the carnivores don't like it because, well, they're carnivores. But in the 1960 version, they're eating
skunk grass. You mean you don't care for skunk grass?
Skunk grass. Fun fact, did you know skunk grass is a term for marijuana? But lucky for them, they play it off more like a bunch of kids being made to eat broccoli. Second scene has Daniel speaking of carnivore-herbivore relationships to Kimba, which are overall the same except for the end bit.
It might be better if you steal farm animals and eat them instead.
No way! That's a terrible idea! Oh,
Maybe, of course this is only a suggestion, but maybe you should give up this farm idea.
what do you mean? Let them go back to their old ways?
Sorry.
You should be!
As the first insect invasion starts going, Bucky gets help from Cheetah, saying he owes him a favor. Cheetah, however, takes the chance to try and eat Bucky out of said favor. This doesn't work, of course, but in the 1993 version, this is where Cheetah finds out how tasty bugs are.
Hey, this isn't bad. Let me tell the others.
More on this later. Just after the bug invasion is the most drastic difference. Bucky, out of grief, says he should have let them eat him, since it probably could have saved the farm. During this, it is revealed the swarm will come back, but the carnivores then explain they'll eat them all up since they taste almost as good as meat. But Polly makes it clear how serious the whole problem actually is.
This is serious, Lenny! Have you thought of what would happen if we don't eat them all? The ones that get away will eat our garden! And the animals that eat grass and leaves will have nothing to eat! They'll die! And the meat-eating animals will have nothing to eat, so they'll die too! There'll be nothing left of the jungle! Ah!
This scene ends with Kimba going back home to think of what to do. Now, in the 1960s version, Bucky was gonna just give them more crop of food to eat, the carnivore suggesting to go somewhere else to get food. They get a warning from Polly again, but the carnivores agree to just fight them off instead, saying they could eat them all up only if they were birds. Next part feels way too rushed. They immediately get the idea to store the insects somewhere because they need food for the birds, and in the end Kimba already has a plan for the bugs, telling everyone to follow him. By the way, this still does not solve the problem between the actual carnivores. Overall, the 1993 version here recognizes the bigger problem, and thanks to not shying away, the story flows a lot better and the problem actually feels resolved. I don't think they ever actually fixed it properly in the other version, because in the 1960s version, they can't bring themselves to say carnivores have to eat meat, every single line relating to such a thing being replaced entirely. For this, the 1993 version is superior. But then we get to the runaway. Okay, overall plot. The jungle gets a new visitor in the form of a warthog, who we learn very quickly, as do the characters, that he really hates himself for being so ugly. Kimba wants him to win a medal to help him out, but then finds out a group of monkeys are wrecking the place. The jungle tries fixing it, but the warthog messes it up, so the warthog decides to tackle the monkeys himself. Although Kimba gets rid of them in the end, he still is rewarded the Medal of Honor, and he gains his confidence once again. On to the scene by scene. Beller's reason for running away. After he runs off from the post office, Kimba soon finds out the big reason why he was acting this way.
Look at me, Kimba. I have warts all over. I'm the ugliest animal in the jungle. It's because I look like my mother. It's all her fault. Everyone was always laughing at me. I knew there was no use in blaming my mother, but I'd feel worse when I kept everything inside me. That's why I decided to leave home, to start fresh in a new jungle.
Look at yourself. You're the handsomest animal in the jungle. And look at me. I'm ugly. I ran away so my mother'd never have to see my ugly face again. Not a single animal in the whole world is as ugly as me. That's why all the others always laugh at me, Kimba. I know my mother must be ashamed of me. That's why I ran away from home.
The big trap. Kimba and company try to handle the trap for the monkeys, but find that Beller already fell in. In the 1960s version, he deliberately did this so he could hide his ugly face. But in the 1993 version...
I'm sorry, I was just passing by.
The final battle with the monkeys. Now this is a bit of an odd one. I mentioned earlier that the 1993 version cut out quite a bit of things, but in the 1960s version, Beller's fight with the monkeys is really cut short. After seeing the 1993 version, I know why.
Catch!
Oh, Beller.
So in this case, the 1960s version did a far better job in this message. In the 1993 version, I don't think they did as good of a job. The motivations for Beller's actions make him sound a little more selfish than miserable.
Kimba, the white lion, he's the bravest little guy in the land. Kimba, the white
So, in conclusion, what do I think did better? The version from 1965 or the version from 1993? If I am going to be honest about it, the version of 1993 actually had more fair points. As I've shown, different episodes have different quality, but no doubt that the 1993 version is much braver. I'd say you can give either one of them a watch and still actually enjoy it for what it is.